DMA is very, very easy, right? You just configure the MC. Let's now jump into the MC and configure it otherwise. So here I am on 3850T, which is at the top of my rack, and I want this one to be not only an MA, but also an MC. So on the same page in Configuration Controller in Mobility Global Config, you see that the role is set to Mobility Agent. So if I want it to be an MC, obviously, I'm going to say Mobility Controller. It says the mobility role is changed to MC, and what happens when you click OK? You're going to have to save the configuration and reboot the whole stack, which is basically DMC. And if DMC is part of the stack of switches, that is going to reboot the entire stack because DMC is a virtual function at the scale of the entire stack. So moving from MC to MA requires you to reboot the switch that you switch to MC or to MA. Okay, so let's do that. I'm going back to the CLI and I'm going to save my configuration and reboot. But just to show you what we do on the graphical interface and what the equivalent would be on the CLI, it would be conft, and then you would say wireless mobility controller. And before we just said wireless mobility controller, and then we added the keyword IP, and then we pointed to the MC. If you do not add IP and if you just say wireless mobility controller, enter, you're not pointing to an MC, you're saying this is an MC. And when you do so, then you have to save your configuration and reboot that box to activate the MC function. And you see it tells you that, you reload, and it's going to save the config and come back. And when it will come back, it will be an MC as well. In between, let's go to the 5760T. And you see this one, there is no choice. The role is directly mobility controller because it's an appliance. So it's like on an AirOS controller, there is no MA to MC differentiation. It's all in one single box. So there is no difference in one to the other. So it's only set to mobility controller. We'll come back on this box to configure mobility. But in between, let's see if my 3850T is back. So if I refresh this page, once the switch has reloaded, now it's mobility controller. And because it is so, there is no possibility to configure the mobility controller IP address because that's the box, right? So on the 3850B, which is MA, I pointed to the 3850T, which is supposed to be DMC. Now on 3850T, what do? Well, there is a bit more I can do there. But if one is DMC and the other one is DMA, there should be a relationship here, right? Because if you remember well on 3850B, I did point to 3850T. So there should be a relationship that happens between DMC and its MA, right? So let's go on the CLI and see what happens. So here I'm on 3850T, the one at the top, DMC, and you see I get that message, received an invalid packet from my MA. And it says source member unknown. And the reason why is because on the MA, I did do my job to point to the MC, but on the MC, I didn't say anything about the MA. And it's just like tunneling. If you just configure one end, the other end doesn't know that it's supposed to be part of the game. So the 3850T is receiving queries from 3850B, say, hey, you are my MC, I heard. And the T is responding, no, I'm not. Never heard that I was supposed to be your MC. So just like you configure the MA to point to the MC, now you have to be on the MC and configure something. And we'll be configuring two things. One is a switch peer group, the SPG. Yes, you configure the SPG on the MC, not on the MA. And the MC is going to push that SPG information down to the MA. And this is why on the MA you only point to the MC. All the rest is going to come from the MC. So on 3850T, my MC, I create a new SPG, for example, SPG1. You can configure something which we call the bridge domain ID, which is an advanced value that doesn't matter here. And you can also configure multicast IP address. All right, let's keep the default and only configure the SPG name. Apply. Now I have SPGs, and my next step is to put MAs inside those SPGs. So the way I do it is to click the SPG and then click New to add a new MA inside the SPG. So here I just put the IP address of my MA. That's 3850B and it's 10.10.20.2. Once I do this, my MC learns that there is an MA 10.10.20.2 that's supposed to be in SPG1. So it's going to send a discovery packet to that MA, and once the relationship has been established between the MC and the MA, then the MC is going to push the SPG name down to the MA. So here you can configure as many SPGs as you need, and for each of the SPGs you see how many members there are in the SPGs. So let's go on the MA this time and try to refresh the page, see what happens. So it's still MA, and you see that now my control link and data link status, which is to the MC, are up and up. As a side note, you may have seen that now I have the mobility switch peer group, and that's because I learned that information from my MC. Just above, you see the mobility protocol port, by the way, which is 16666. So that is the mobility port, right? So my controller, my MC to MA relationship is going to be happening over these ports. Although its encapsulation is going to be CAPWAP, that CAPWAP traffic between the MC and the MA is going to use the mobility port. So that's the SPG configuration. On the MA, you just point to the MC. On the MC, you create the SPGs, include the IP address of the MAs inside that SPG, and that configuration is going to be pushed down to the MAs using their IP address. The only thing you see now on the MA is that there is only one member in that SPG. And this is important because if you remember what we said about mobility, that MA needs to know the other MAs in its SPG because they are going to exchange the PMK for the client. So that MA needs to know very well who else is in that SPG. It doesn't need to know anybody outside of that SPG except the MC, but it needs to know the other members of that SPG. Also on the MA, notice that you have those menus about switch peer group, etc., but they do not make any sense on the MA. So when you go there, if the 3850 or 3650 is in MA mode, you will see that the page is not available. So the menu is there because it's a web server, right? But you do not configure SPGs here. And you also do not configure mobility peers that will be able to configure in DMC. If you go to DMC, you see there is an option here to configure those mobility peers. So that's an MC config. So even if the left menu shows those items on the MA, you will not be able to use those.